Well, hello sports fans and welcome to In the Loop with Jake LaHoop. We're officially a quarter of the way through each team's 2018 season and some Super Bowl favorites are already being crowned, as well as some basement dwellers. Week 4 is done, number 5 is getting started, and so are we. Today we are diving into Earl Thomas and his broken leg, a Fitz tragedy in Tampa Bay, and how the Cardinals are left out from celebrating a win again. Time to tackle these topics. Earl Thomas started the 2018 season wanting one of two things to happen. Well, maybe more things, but publicly, one of two. A contract extension or traded to another team. With the Seahawks saying, nah bro, he decided to do a hold in rather than a hold out. And now let's break those down. A holdout, which is something that we see quite often in the NFL, is when players don't report to their teams in order to get big extensions. They do this because they are near the end of their current contracts and want to get some career insurance. Too bad it takes longer than 15 minutes, or else Thomas wouldn't be in this position. A hold in means he was on Seahawks property during the week and playing in games, but he refused to practice and would sit on the sidelines to protest. Teammates of Thomas's, including Bobby Wagner, came to his defense and spelled out how this plays out for Thomas. If he doesn't come in, then he's not a team player. If he does come and get hurt, he shouldn't have come in this position that they are put in often. In other words, damned if you do, damned if you don't. This is the worst case scenario that Thomas was worried about in this offseason. He wanted to sign a contract which reflects that he was one of the best safeties, not only in the league, but in this generation. But the Seahawks wanted to keep it lighter in order to build a team contending for championships. We tackled that last week with how the Pittsburgh Steelers are handling their own contract nightmare, and you can watch that episode here. Now that Earl Thomas has been injured, the Seahawks now find themselves in a lose-lose position because either way, they will lose him this offseason. He's not going to want to come back to a team that would not pay him the contract that he deserves, and he broke his leg trying to be a team player in the process. The only question left in this situation is, will Thomas land in Kansas City with other All-Pro safety Eric Berry? And as a Broncos fan, please know. The Buccaneers entered Week 4 coming off a roller coaster of a Monday Night Football game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ryan Fitzpatrick threw 3 interceptions over the course of the game, but did lead a late rush for victory in the fourth quarter by putting up 2 of his 3 touchdowns. The defense held the best they could, but in the end, it wasn't enough to overcome the 4 overall turnovers the Bucs offense gave away. That's on Fitzy and the play calling. Now the Week 4 thrashing that the Bears provided, that was on the defense. The first 5 touchdown drives, the Bears had averaged 5.5 plays and 74 yards per drive. That's like having the Friends cast playing their Thanksgiving game as your defense. At halftime, the coaching staff figured that it was Fitzpatrick's fault that the defense was picking dandelions out of the middle of the 100-year-old stadium instead of trying to stop the second-year quarterback from having one of the best games a quarterback could ever have. Now in comes Jameis Winston as the relieving thrower, and he didn't fare much better. On his 6th throw of the 2018 season, he throws an interception to linebacker Danny Trevathan. Winston would end up throwing another pick later in the game, giving him a total of 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions in a half-game span, compared to Fitzpatrick's 11 touchdowns and 5 interceptions in the span of 3.5 games. It's also worth noting that Fitzpatrick has the 5th highest passing totals at the end of Week 4, and he also just had his jersey delivered to the Hall of Fame for being the first quarterback to throw for 400 yards in 3 consecutive games. I understand that the Bucs want to give the first pick of the 2015 draft a chance to prove himself worthy of a contract extension, but why place the blame on a quarterback who has done well for your team through the first few games instead of the horrible secondary that allowed Mitch Trubisky to throw 354 yards, 6 touchdowns, and no interceptions, or the quote-unquote revamped defensive line that only got 1 sack in that game? Fun fact, that revamped defensive line is tied for 22nd in the league with 8 sacks. The cost of a win in the NFL is extremely high. The cost of being the last team in the NFL to get a win is even higher. Having a goose egg in either the wins or losses column after wrapping the first 4 games of the season will always draw attention to your team. When you have that 0 in the losses column, that's just a thing of beauty. Just ask the Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Rams. When you have a 0 in the wins column, nothing is big enough to hide you from the blitz coming from the media, and more terrifyingly, the fans. The Cardinals enter Week 5 looking for anything to get their offense rolling and win a game. This offseason, they signed Sam Bradford to bring a spark he had in Minnesota to the Larry Fitzgerald show, but that didn't work. David Johnson, who was a fantasy football darling for 1 year, hasn't been able to do much of anything either. The coaches turned to Josh Rosen after Bradford had less than good performances during his start so far this season. A lot of critics are coming in to say that Rosen's play was reason for optimism, but having basically 3 drives go 3 and out is not a good thing. The winless Cardinals head to San Francisco to face the 1-win 49ers in a game of mediocrity. The Niners lost Jimmy Garoppolo to a torn ACL injury and looked like last year's team before he arrived. Could a win be in the cards for the Cards? They sure hope so. With that recap, let's look at which team had the best offensive and defensive productions from last week. Starting on the offensive side, we have for the 4th week in a row, 2 teams who had massive results and just so happened to be in the same game. Now, our offensive performances come from unlikely sources, the Cleveland Browns and the Oakland Raiders. Both teams combined for our 2nd highest point total in the season so far with 87 points, and the highest was in week 1 when the Bucs and the Saints went for 88 points. This is, however, our highest yardage combination with 1,052 yards. Now, I have a feeling this year is going to continue with record-breaking performances once we're near the end of the year. Both teams combined for 6 touchdowns, but also had 6 turnovers. Rookie Nick Chubb rushed for 105 yards on 3 carries with 2 touchdowns. For the Raiders, Marshawn Lynch turned in a monster yardage performance with 130 yards, but had no touchdowns. The big question comes at the end of the game when Carlos Hyde seemed to have a first down after a strong run on 3rd down, but was overturned by the refs. The media and the fans are calling for them to be taken out as refs, but the Browns had plenty of opportunities to overcome that letdown. For example, they could have picked up a first down on 4th and millimeters, stopped Oakland from driving for a touchdown, stopped Oakland from their 2-point conversion attempt to tie the game, or won in overtime. That loss comes down to the coaching decision, not the refs. Our best defensive performance had some competition with the Green Bay Packers shutting out the Buffalo Bills 22-0. But I have to give this week's full recognition to the Chicago Bears and their performance against the Bucs. It was so dominant that the Bucs ended up switching their quarterbacks at halftime to spice up the dullness, but it was almost worse than what they did in the first half. The Bears defense had 3 interceptions on 2 quarterbacks and held both of them under 145 yards. The Bucs split the rushing carries between 2 or more backs and held all of them to under 60 yards. 2 of those interceptions came from the linebackers, which normally isn't a position known for their catching ability. Something else worth noting is that Khalil Mack has recorded his 4th strip sack in as many weeks and seems to be sprinting to the first defensive player since Lawrence Taylor in the 1986 season to grab the NFL's MVP award. Now, fun fact, there have only been 2 defensive players to win the league's MVP since the award started in 1957. Taylor in 1986 and Alan Page in 1971. There's also a kicker who took home the NFL MVP award named Mark Mosley in 1982. And now don't tell me the NFL doesn't recognize that kicking crowd. Week 4 is finished. Now we'll take a dive into week 5 and see which game should be the best of the bunch and worth watching. Starting off tonight is the Indianapolis Colts heading to New England to take on the Patriots. And there are also 4 divisional games being played, with most of them happening out west. Before we go out that far, the Green Bay Packers travel to Detroit and face the Lions, which we know they love coney dogs from the Game Day Eats episode. On the California coast, we have the Mediocre Bowl happening between the Arizona Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers. A little further south, the Oakland Raiders try to string 2 wins together by facing the Los Angeles Chargers. And finally, we end in Seattle with the other Los Angeles team, the Rams, attack the north to challenge a Seahawks offense you want to shield your child's eyes from. Your Week 5 ends in New Orleans when Alex Smith and his new team, the Washington Redskins, try to take down Drew Brees and all of Bourbon Street, which we'll be covering with this week's Game Day Eats. Now, I thought about making beignets, but we really know it's all about the gumbo. So be ready to watch that on Monday before the game. You're in the loop for Week 4 and ready for Week 5. Make sure you subscribe to In the Loop for all of your football needs, except for a Cardinals win, and Game Day Eats, which posts on Monday, to fill you on awesome food to share with your friends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the field.